The moon poured milk-white light over Silvercrest Valley, smoothing the scars of old battles until even the broken stones looked holy. Lila Rowan stood at the edge of the clearing with pine needles biting the soles of her feet and rain clinging to the ends of her hair. It was fate night, one of those thickly threaded evenings when the world pretended there were answers to everything. When the sky opened and the bond chose, and girls went home mated or marked, or Les thought she had scrubbed the kitchen floors for hours just to still her shaking. She pinned the one decent dress she owned with a safety pin because the zipper had gone crooked long ago. She had braided her hair tightly so it wouldn't show how badly her hands trembled. And she brought nothing else, no luck charm, no ribbon, no foolish prayer, because she had decided she would meet whatever came toward her with empty hands. Rowan, someone whispered behind her. The name a leaf carried by wind. Lila didn't turn. The Omegas gathered along the outer line like obedient shadows, trained by years of practice to make room with their silence. On the far side, the warriors of Silvercrest, oil-bright and confident, formed a wall of shoulders and teeth. Between them, lit by hanging lanterns and the faithful moon, the pack pulse thrummed. Tonight the bond would pull, 1,000 invisible threads humming. Guiding the chosen to the chosen, somewhere a drum started low and steady, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Lila breathed through the ache and told herself she didn't care which way the pull went, as long as it went. She was 20 and tired of belonging to no one, tired of belonging to everyone, tired of being told to keep her eyes down because Omegas made people uneasy when they looked too long at anything. The bonfire crackled. Sparks rose like tiny gold birds and died as they met the night. Elder Mirren stepped forward, white hair unbound, staff tapping a rhythm older than memory. "Moon witness," she said. "Come see. Our blood stands waiting." Voices answered, low, rough, reverent. Wolves behind skin, skin over wolves. Lila had thought she would be numb by now. She had practiced being numb for years, turning bruise into breath, hunger into patience, humiliation into soundless work. But Fate Night had a way of unmaking all that practice. The air itself felt alive, the scent of pine and damp earth and animal warmth sharper than a blade. The pull came as a whisper at first, just a tug behind the breastbone, a hush through her marrow that said, "Look." She looked across the circle. The Alpha sun walked through the parting bodies like tide through grass. Adrian Holla. His name moved the crowd the way his body moved the firelight-polished inevitable. He wore a black shirt open at the throat and a careless arrogance that made people step back before he neared. When he passed the warriors, they bowed their heads a fraction. When he neared the elders, a ripple moved like a school of silverfish along the ring. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His eyes were gold in this light, not the soft kind. The kind that burned. The pull inside Lila clenched out. No, she thought. No, not him. Not because she was foolish. She knew what she was, knew what he was, knew how fairy tales used girls like her as warnings. But her wolf lifted her head anyway, breathing in, recognizing. The bond was not a mind and didn't care about the logic of rank. It cared about scent, about the way certain breaths found each other in the dark and claimed a single rhythm. He glanced over the circle as if he could feel it too, that quickening thread. For a fraction, those gold eyes slid past warriors, past daughters of betas dressed in ivory and stones, past the pack's well-fed future. And then his gaze caught on Lila like a blade catching sunlight, thought something tore through her at relief. Terror, yes, there, and the old ache of a story that had finally found its voice. The drumbeats seemed to stumble. The bonfire leaned toward her. Her wolf rose against her ribs, pushing. Adrian Haas stepped into the open center where the bared earth waited for vows or severances. His mouth tipped at one edge, not quite a smile, not anything kind. "Come," he said to the air, and the word was a command to the bond itself. Lila moved before she knew she had. The circle widened around her as if etiquette were a living thing. She heard laughter swallow itself, heard someone's breath catch, heard the viscous silence of the alphas absorbing a surprise they didn't like. An omega daring to walk the open ground, barefoot, poor, unknown, the kind of girl the world forgot a mustn't needed her hands. Adrian watched her as if he were watching a coin he'd flipped. Unsure which face it would show as it fell, she stepped a meter from him because anything closer would crumble her. The heat coming off his body was a direction she could get lost in. The scent of hemp-cedar smoke, iron, the metallic chew of a coming storm was a road her wolf was already running. Tongue out, wild with thirst, she wasn't alone in the center anymore. The bond was here too, humming between them like a wire. He tilted his head. "Name, Lila Rowan," she said, voice steady because it had to be. He looked at her mouth while she said it. Then he looked at the elders without looking away from her. "Do you feel it?" he asked. It sounded like he was asking about weather, about something that might ruin a hunt. "I do," Elder Mirren said, watching both of them with that tired mercy she kept for the young. "It is strong." A murmur ran through the pack like a dark wind. Adrian's expression didn't change. His eyes hardened, if anything, as though fate had handed him something inconvenient. He stepped closer anyway, the bare distance between them thickening with electricity. It would take nothing less than nothing to reach out and grip his shirt, to let the bond pull her the rest of the way across the edge. She could feel it promising, the way bonds promise like liars, that after this, she wouldn't be alone again. Adrian. The Alpha's voice from the edge, soft but heavy. A warning disguised as a name. Something flickered in his eyes. In that flicker, Lila thought she saw a boy who had been taught how to be a weapon too young. She thought she saw the outline of a fear he would never name because men like him didn't name fears. And then it was gone, the flicker sucked back down where trained creatures keep their truths. He stepped back. He did it slowly, the way you step back from a cliff you had merely decided to jump. He looked at her like he had memorized her against his will. The exact pattern of freckles near her left eye. The line of her lower lip that was fuller than the upper. The way the vein at her throat beat as if trying to claw out. "Lila Rowan," he said. And the way he said her name sounded like stone. "I, Adrian Halle, heir of Silvercrest, reject you." The words fell, one by one, like nails into wood. Lila didn't breathe. The bond did. It inhaled the syllables and turned them into knives. The ripping came an instant later. An invisible hand braced inside her chest and tore. She had been ready for pain. She hadn't been ready for silence. The wolf inside her howled once, white-hot, then turned its head and bit down on something no mouth could hold. The world narrowed to the raw edge of breath because if she lost that, she lost everything. No, the word didn't come from her. She realized only after a heartbeat that it came from someone at the ring's edge, Mara, a beta's daughter who'd been her one almost friend in the kitchens, hands over her mouth. No, enough, the Alpha said, and the quiet became the thick quiet of obedience. Adrian didn't move. He didn't glow or shift his weight or pretend regret. He stood like a statue whose eyes burned. For a second, only a second, a pulse of something went across his. Features, a muscle jumping near his jaw, a tremor of promise broken. Then even that was gone, smoothed into the flawless blank of a future ruler. Elder Myron's staff struck the dirt once. "The bond is severed," she said in a voice that dipped with sorrow. "Witnessed." The witness chorus rose without eagerness, a thing done because it must be. Lila heard the sound as if through water. She felt her knees wanting to go. She told them no with the last command she had left. She stood not because she had anything to prove, but because kneeling would have taken a piece of her she would never get back. Her mouth tasted like metal, and somewhere behind her eyes, a bright thread snapped and another, until it felt like the whole loom of her life had come apart. Walk, she told herself. Walk before they see you fall. She turned. The crowd opened the way with a kind of greed. Wolves had an appetite for weakness the way they did for me. Lila kept her head level and the horizon in her eyes, and the breath locked into a steady rhythm. And two. Out two, down the path, through the scent of pine sap and damp moss, through the whispering cloth of dresses, into the dark between trees. Behind her, the drum had stopped. Or maybe it hadn't, and she couldn't hear it anymore over the slowing thunder in her chest. The forest took her, the tall trunks closing like ribs around a heart that beat too much, and not enough. She didn't run at first. Running was a conversation you had with your own fear, and she wouldn't give fear her voice. She walked. She stepped over roots, slick with old rain, and ducked under limbs bearded with lichen. And when the ground sloped, she let it pull her, a tide tugging. A mercy. When the sob came, it surprised her as a bird hitting glass. She stopped, put her palm against a tree, and let the sound come a second time, then a third. It wasn't the sound of grief, not exactly. It was the sound of the body making room for a pain that didn't know how to live anywhere yet. Lila? She flinched so hard her head struck bark. She turned, shoulders up, hands open in the useless shape of defense. The boy who had said her name froze with his hands lifted in front of his chest, like he approached a frightened Mare. Joss, she said, exhaling his name like an apology. He was 16, all elbows and hopeful eyes. A kitchen runner who had raced messages for her on nights when the ovens burned both their skins. He looked like he'd grown 3 inches in a week and hadn't figured out what to do with the extra. I followed. He said, face earnest, cheeks blotched with effort. I had to see if... He swallowed, sudden fury breaking through his voice. He can't. He did. Joss shook his head hard, as if he could rattle the world into a different shape. You're not going back, right? You're not going back to peel potatoes and pretend that the smell of their skins doesn't make me remember. Every winter I was hungry? She asked, more sharply than she meant. She covered her mouth, breathed through her fingers, tried again. No. Joss's shoulders dropped. Good. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a rag. I brought bread. And the knife you like? He hesitated. I can come with you as far as the river. Lila took the bundle, the knife's weight a small, rational planet, and a night that had curved wrong. Thank you. A thought hammered at her temple. If she took him with her, he'd get blamed for her leaving. Whipped, at least. Worse, if the new beta wanted to make an example. Go back, she said, and when he opened his mouth, she shook her head. Please, tell Mara I'm not dead. Tell her I'm not coming back to die slowly. And she didn't know what else to ask, so she finished, soft, eat half the bread. He looked like he wanted to argue until his bones fell out. Then he stepped forward and hugged her so hard his ribs pressed into hers. He smelled like flower and youth and the kind of loyalty that breaks you because you can't keep it safe. He pulled away, wiping his face on his sleeve, as if he'd been trapped in a sudden rain. I'll tell Mara, he said, and I'll spit in Adrian's soup. Do that, she managed. He left with reluctance, but he left, glancing back like a fox that can't decide whether to trust the woods. His footfalls faded until the forest took even that. Lila let her shoulders sag for the first time. The sky beyond the canopy had that pearly sheen just before a storm. Moon blurred at the edges as if an artist's sleeve had smudged it. The air was damp and smelled of something electrical. She ate a thin slice of bread, not because she was hungry, but because there was a future somewhere that required her to have eaten. She tucked the knife at the back of her waistband where it lay cool against her spine. Then she ran, running. Now wasn't panic. It was obedience to some older order written in the bones of prey and women who refused to be prey. She ran quiet, toe to heel, finding the paths that deer used, the places the earth dipped and eased. She could feel the pack's presence behind her mind, knitting the story already, mouths passing it along, the way gossip sometimes sounded like prayer. Maybe someone would be sent after her. Maybe not. She was Omega, and Omegas were replaceable like pots and planks in hands. Except for the part they weren't, except for the ways they held the pack together. When no one noticed, the river found her with its whisper. She slowed, listened, crouched. The water here ran over flat stone, a wide mouth line that could be crossed if you knew where the rock rose nearest the surface. She knew. She had carried baskets of clean roots this way in summer when even the betas let the sun forgive them for a few hours. She crossed on chilled ankles, breath steadying, and on the far bank, she paused to listen again. Nothing but the water conversing with itself, the occasional bark of a fox, the click of a beetle doing whatever small important thing beetles do, a flicker to her right, just the edge of movement. She didn't turn her head. She let her eyes slide. There, a wolf, pale as winter grass, standing among ferns, body angled so that if she ran, he could run faster. She smelled him, the tang of pack that was hers and not hers, the overlay of human sweat and oiled leather. An enforcer. Keep your hands where I can see them, he said softly, not unkindly. They sent me to bring you back. Did they? Lila murmured, facing the river again. Her heart was a high bird in a narrow chest, beating against bone bars. As a courtesy, he said. And that was a lie. Wolves didn't do courtesy for Omegas. But maybe it was the kind of lie you told to make a thing palatable to yourself. He shifted, brindled back, rippling. You don't want to be alone out here tonight. Storm's coming. You know how the old pines fall when the wind cuts them cross-grain. I do, she said. I also know what happens to girls who come back from this. He didn't answer for a moment. When he did, his voice had a burr of regret. I'm supposed to make you. She turned her head slowly. Supposed to or want to? His ears twitched. He was older than she'd thought at first, gray beginning under his jaw. A man who had done too many unpleasant jobs for too many years and had stopped calling them that. Don't make me hurt you, he said. The words weren't cruel. They were simply accurate. Lila thought about Joss's thin shoulders, about Mara's habit of tying her hair with twine because ribbon felt like a promise she couldn't keep, about the way Elder Myron's eyes had softened when the staff struck the earth. She thought about Adrian's face when the bond pulled. If he had felt it at all, if it had cost him anything to cut it. You're not the worst of them, she said to the enforcer, which in another life might have been a compliment. He huffed a breath that might have been a rueful laugh. Far from the best. She drew the knife. He tensed, lip lifting, a warning rumble starting up from somewhere deep. Don't, he said. I'm not going to fight you, Lila replied, knife hanging low. I'm going to make a choice. If you come for me, you'll do your duty. If you let me pass... She looked down at the river so he wouldn't have to hold her gaze while he betrayed his orders. No one has to know you were ever here. The rumble faded slowly. He looked away from her toward the canopy. The first thin bolt of lightning pried the clouds a finger width. He lowered his head, ears flattening at the sky's threat. Then he stepped back one step, to his paws on leaves that barely whispered. When he looked at her again, his eyes had shifted human, tired and kind. Run north, he said. There's a ridge. Beyond it land that isn't ours. Whose? She asked foolishly because it didn't matter. Anything beyond the fence of her life was freedom. He hesitated. Shadowcrest. The word filled the woods with a different electricity, one not born of weather. Shadowcrest, with its stories you weren't supposed to repeat. Shadowcrest, whose Alpha had built an empire with a particular kind of ruthlessness and particular kind of grief. Shadowcrest, where the wolves wore darker coats and the laws were written with fewer words and more blood. Thank you, she said. She meant it as if it would have to last her a year. Go, he said. She went, the ridge bit into her calves, a long rise through laurel and granite. The storm came in fast, skimming the treetops like something hunting. Wind shouldered the pines till they groaned in their joints, and the scent of sap grew sharp, metallic as coin. Lila's dress slapped her thighs. The braid came loose. Hair stuck at the back of her neck where sweat and rain met. She climbed with her hands in the dirt, nails blacked. Breath a rasp, she kept steady by counting 4 paces inhale, 4 paces exhale, until numbers lost meaning and only rising did. At the top, the trees opened enough that she could see it, the other valley, a mouth of shadow where the storm had already swallowed the moon. She crouched, palms on her thighs, and let the sight settle into her bones. Freedom didn't look like welcome. It looked like risk in a black suit. She started down the far side, and that was when the lightning found the old pine dot it didn't strike near her 10 lengths to her right. Maybe more, but the world went white and sound didn't have a word for itself for a second. When noise returned, it came like a body through glass. The pine split, toppling slow then fast, crashing through smaller trees that threw their hands up as if surrender would save them. Lila leapt backward, slipped on the wet leaves, skidded on her hip, slammed her shoulder into rock. Pain starbursted. The pine smashed down where she had been, throwing sparks into the rain as its trunk tore at its roots. She lay on her back, sky unstitched above, rain sewing it back up 1 drop at a time. For a heartbeat, she considered staying, letting the storm make the next choice. Then she rolled, found her elbow, found her knee, found standing. Her shoulder screamed. She told it to wait its turn. She moved around the fallen trunk, left hand on bark. Breath of thread she refused to drop. She didn't see the road until she nearly stepped onto it. A narrow ribbon carved into the slope, black and slick, the kind of road made for cars whose engines sounded like secrets. Lila swayed at its edge, blinking rain, palm to her shoulder where heat gathered like anger. Headlights appeared around a bend as if the storm had spat them out. She could have jumped back into the trees. She could have laid flat and become another shadow. She didn't. She stepped forward because she had run out of things to run from. Because sometimes you met the next thing head on, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. The car was long and low, black that ate the night around it. It braked with a predator's grace, no screech, just the firm knowledge of traction. It stopped a breath from her knees. A dark mirror reflecting a woman who looked like she had been pulled through a thorn bush. The back door opened. Before the engine fully idled, "Get in," a voice said from Ma. Depth smooth and cool and carrying the kind of authority that had nothing to do with shouting. Lila stood very still. The knife in her palm felt small and peasant-made. The interior light made a pool of soft gold, and in it sat a man too sharply drawn to be ordinary. He wore a dark suit that fit his shoulders like a decision. His hair was black, cut with severe precision, and his eyes were the most controlled thing she had ever seen. Not because they didn't show emotion, but because they chose which emotion to show and when. For the smallest breath, a silver glint caught in them. Almost a trick of the light, almost not. "I don't get into cars with strangers," Lila said, because her grandmother had taught her that lesson before wolves taught her harder ones. "Wise," the man said. His gaze flicked to her shoulder, gauging pain like a surgeon would gauge a cut, clinical and careful. "You're bleeding. It's nothing." "It never is," he said. "Until it is." Lightning stitched the clouds again. Thunder rolled its weight down the valley. The man's nostrils flared barely. A human wouldn't have noticed. The barest tilt of his head suggested he had just mapped the entire forest with scent. Weather and sound, Storm will bring trees down, he said. Then the road. This is the safe choice. He paused, as if tasting the word safe and finding it unfamiliar. For tonight, she swallowed. The car smelled like leather and smoked, and something darker beneath green cedar crushed underfoot. It hit the place inside her where the bond had left a bruise. Her wolf lifted her face to the rain, as if even through skin, it could scent the man fully. Something old in it did not roll over or bare its throat. It watched. You're far from Silvercrest, the man said, and the word Silvercrest came out with an old weariness, like a name scraped off a gravestone and said again by mistake. Deliberately, I assume? She nodded. I won't go back. Good. He didn't smile with his mouth, but his voice curved, and the car felt larger for a moment, like the night had made room around it. Then get in, and we can decide later whether I'm a worse choice. She studied him because if she made this mistake, there would not be time for another. His left hand rested on a cane laid along the seat beside him, knuckles scarred, veins a map of battles he didn't discuss. The cane's head was a wolf silver. Lightning engraved its snout and left no burn. His suit didn't hide the kind of strength that didn't come from a gem. There were men who wore power like jewelry. There were men who wore it like a language. He was the second kind. Who are you? She asked. Darius Blackwood, he said, and the night itself hushed. Alpha of Shadowcrest. Her breath stuttered. Not fear, exactly. Recognition, the way you recognize the sea the first time you see it, having only known a river. Stories had used his name like a whetstone. Children were told not to speak it 3 times in the dark. Men spat after saying it as if it might purify their mouths. Women had gone missing in the direction of his territory, and sometimes they came back wearing silk and a different look in their eyes, and sometimes they didn't come back at all. Shadowcrest. The enforcer's warning came back with its small charity. Your people don't usually invite ours into your cars, Lila said, because it felt safer to hold to a fact than to touch the shape of his name. My people do many things they haven't done before. Darius Blackwood replied softly. Everything changes when the storm comes. Wind pushed the trees as if trying to shove the valley into a new shape. Rain thickened. The second flash of lightning came closer. Thunder followed faster. The world was a hell breath. Lila weighed the knife in her hand like it could tip the decision. The bond ache was still there, raw and ragged. She could live with pain. She had. But the world had shifted tonight in ways she didn't have words for, and the only thing that made sense was stepping into the next unknown before the last one devoured her. She slid the knife back against her spine and moved toward the open door. Darius shifted the cane aside and angled his body to make room, not because he wanted to look courteous, but because he had learned to be. Up close, his scent unspooled in layers, cedar, winter smoke, and below those, iron and something wild that the suit did not tame. Lila put a foot into the car. The door hummed with insulated weight. She lowered herself into the soft dark and felt absurdly like she had climbed into a myth that had been told about someone else. The door shut with a sound that felt like a promise sealing itself. Darius lifted 2 fingers. The car moved, purring with disdain for the road's slickness, and the forest slid past, trees bowing under the sky's temper. For a minute, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a precise thing, measured by a metronome only he could hear. You're injured, he said finally. I can bandage it, she replied. I've done worse with less. He glanced at her, something like acknowledgement crossing his face. I don't doubt it. She looked out the window, watched rain make runes on the glass. Her body felt oddly weightless, like the gravity of Silvercrest had long arms and had just now let go. The ache at her sternum pulsed and settled, pulsed and settled. What do you want, Lila Rowan? Darius asked, and he didn't say her name with stone. He said it like he was naming a constellation he'd seen once and kept in his pocket. The question landed so simply she almost laughed. No one had asked her that in a way that implied the answer mattered. People asked what she could do, what she would do, what she wouldn't, not what she wanted. I want. Her throat closed around too many options. A bed not in a pantry. A life where she wasn't a pair of hands. A day when the sound of a silver name didn't make her small. I want to stop being a thing other people decide, she said at last. Good, he said again, as if the word pleased him in his mouth. That's a beginning. And you? She turned it back because she needed to know what once drove the man who had driven out into a storm at midnight and stopped. His black car at the edge of a girl's ruin. What do you want, Alpha of Shadowcrest? For the first time, something like surprise lifted his eyebrow a fraction. He looked at her properly then, as if recalibrating. Tonight, he considered, gaze returning to the road, voice lowering as if truth didn't require volume. Tonight I want to keep breathing. Tomorrow I want to see who I become if I do. It was not the answer of a man who slept well. It was not the answer of a man who lied to himself. Lightning cracked open the sky ahead. For a breath, the road lit with white veins. In that flash, Lila saw their reflections in the windshield, the ghost of a girl who had lost a bond, and the shadow of a man who had lost something he did not name. The car slid across the invisible border into Shadowcrest. She didn't feel a gate or a fence. She felt the change the way you feel the moment sleep takes you, the world tilting, not unpleasantly, just undeniably. Outside, the storm redrew the valley in thick strokes. Inside, Darius Blackwood leaned his cane against the leather and reached forward to a compartment where a small case lay. He lifted it, opened it, and took out a roll of white cloth and a bottle with clear liquid inside. May I? He asked, and if the Alpha of Shadowcrest asking permission felt like a paradox, Lila decided to let paradox shelter her tonight. She nodded. He moved with controlled economy, unscrewing the cap, soaking gauze with antiseptic that bit the air, then turned toward her in the confined space. The warmth of him was immediate, a field she stepped into by inches. His hands were sure, their touch clinical and distant except for moments it couldn't be. When knuckles brushed skin and a hum passed down nerves she hadn't known were awake. This will sting, he said. And when she didn't flinch, something like approval flickered across his face. He wrapped her shoulder deftly, snug but not cool, finishing with a neat tie that lay flat against the dress's torn seam. When he was done, he sat back, studying his work for precisely 2 seconds before returning the case to its compartment, as if healing were one more task to complete with precision. Thank you, she said. It came out softer than she intended, gratitude with edges still sharp. He inclined his head, a king acknowledging a gift he had accepted long ago, that people said thank you to him even when it was his job to provide a thing. The car turned onto a wider road. Far off, lights gathered in the valley like a city had spilled its jewels. Lila had never seen Shadowcrest up close. She had pictured it smaller, meaner, a place of sharp inconvenience. She hadn't pictured glass and steel and lines clean enough to cut. She hadn't pictured the way the storm reflected in surfaces so high they might be mistaken for sky, the way the trees still shouldered the edges as if told they, too, could stay. What happens now? She asked, and the question was not thin with fear or fat with expectation. It was a straightforward inquiry into the logic of the next breath. Now, Darius Blackwood said, voice a gradient between command and invitation. You will be given a room where no one has the right to enter without your leave. He glanced at her, and there was something like iron under velvet in his tone. You will sleep without being watched. In the morning, you will eat without being made to count your bites. And then, he paused as if putting words on a scale. Then we will discover whether your leaving was enough or whether you want to begin again. Begin again. The phrase settled around her like a coat she wasn't sure she'd earned. Outside, Shadowcrest unfolded bridges of polished stone across fast water, lanterns that burned steady despite rain, a mansion rising from the slope with windows for eyes, lit and calm. Not a castle. Something sharper. Something built by a man who didn't believe in pretending a fortress. Was a home and so had constructed both at once. The car pulled under a covered entrance, where water ran in disciplined sheets off the roof. The door opened before the driver could take the handle. Darius stepped out first, the cane more habit than need, rain mottling his suit jacket, hair hardly touched. He turned, offered her a hand not because she was fragile, but because he practiced a ritual that said, I am responsible for what I bring into my sphere. Lila put her palm in his. Heat met heat. For a moment, the bond ache was quiet. Not gone, quiet. She stepped out, the gravel underfoot cold, the night wide and contained. A man in a dark coat approached mid-40s, composed a scar like a neat stitch under his ear. He bowed with the minimum required to honor without self-erasure. Alpha. Corin, Darius said, that single name a packet of trust and order. This is Lila Rowan, see to her comfort. Corin's eyes flicked to Lila in a way, not lingering, not dismissive. Of course, to her, welcome to Blackwood House. House, not mansion. Words chosen like knives. Lila looked up once more at the facade glass reflecting lightning, stone shoulder in the wind, doors standing open to warm light. Her world had ended an hour ago. The end had been public and exact. This beginning was private and precarious. A thing that could still break if spoken too loudly. She met Darius Blackwood's gaze because she refused to shrink inside this new thing before it started. He held it, not pinning her, but letting her test the weight. Something like a promise moved between them. Too early to name, too strong to deny. Behind him. Thunder rolled away toward the mountains as if chased inside, somewhere. A clock began to strike midnight. Lila Rowan lifted her chin, crossed the threshold, and felt the last strands of Silvercrest's gravity fall from her shoulders like old cobwebs. The doors closed softly, the storm thinned to a respectful drizzle, and in the quiet that followed, in a house that had never before held her name, she heard the low hum of a new life turning on. Rain was falling in silver sheets by the time Lila awoke. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft for someone used to straw mattresses and cold floors. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and something expensive she couldn't name. A fireplace hissed somewhere in the room, flames dancing against black marble. She blinked into the dim light, and the first thought that came to her was, I'm alive. Then memory rushed back like a flood. Adrian's rejection. The forest. The lightning. The car. The man with silver eyes. Lila sat up too fast, the pain in her shoulder reminding her of the fall. The bandage was clean, perfectly wrapped, smelling faintly of antiseptic. Someone had tended to her with care. The door creaked open before she could think. A woman entered, a tall figure dressed in black and white, her silver hair tied in a neat bun. Her posture was regal but not cold. You're awake, she said softly. The Alpha asked to be informed the moment you stirred. Lila blinked. Alpha? The woman smiled faintly. You're in Shadowcrest. And yes, I mean that Alpha. Before Lila could reply, footsteps echoed down the hall, measured, powerful, unhurried. Darius Blackwood appeared in the doorway, the storm haloing him in gray light. He wasn't dressed for rain anymore. A black shirt clung to his frame, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing faint scars like lightning traces across tan skin. His presence filled the room the way thunder filled the sky settle at first, then overwhelming, I trust you slept, he said, voice low and resonant. Lila hesitated. I didn't expect to. That's usually the first sign of safety, he replied. When the body forgets to stay on guard. He stepped closer, his scent brushing her senses again, dark cedar, rain, smoke, and something faintly metallic that spoke of power. I owe you thanks, she said quietly. For saving me? His expression didn't shift much, but his gaze softened by a fraction. I don't make a habit of rescuing strangers from storms. The forest, however, doesn't forgive easily. You were lucky I found you. Her lips curved faintly. Lucky isn't something I've ever been. Maybe you were due, he said simply. Silence stretched between them, filled with the crackle of fire and rain. There was something in his eyes, a weight that spoke of loss, of promises unkept, of nights spent staring at ghosts. Why did you stop? She asked suddenly. Why help me? He regarded her for a long moment. Because he smelled like someone who'd been broken and hadn't given up. Lila's breath hitched. It wasn't flirtation. It was truth. Raw and unadorned. He turned slightly, glancing at the fire. Eat something. Corin will bring you food. Then we'll talk about what happens next. What has happened next? She asked. That depends on whether you plan to run again. Her pulse stilled. Would you stop me? Only if you were running toward danger, he said. Otherwise, the door's open, always. It was the strangest kind of kindness, a freedom wrapped in command. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. You should know, Miss Rowan, he said without looking back. Silvercrest sent scouts past the border at dawn. You were being hunted. Her stomach dropped. They're looking for me. Adrian Hawley doesn't like being defied, Darius said. But he won't find you here. Not unless I allow it. There was something in his tone that made the air itself obey. When he left, the room felt colder. The maid Alara, she later learned, returned with a tray of food. Fresh bread, roasted meat, and a cup of something hot and spiced. Lila ate slowly, her mind whirling. Was she safe? Or had she simply traded one kind of cage for another, this time gilded in glass and marble? That evening, she found herself wandering the mansion. The halls were lined with portraits, each more haunting than the last wolves painted beside humans, eyes glowing faintly even under candlelight. She paused before one painting that seemed newer than the others. A woman in a crimson dress stood beside Darius. Her smile was soft, her eyes alive. A wedding band gleamed on her hand. Alara's voice startled her. That was Lady Evelyn. The Alpha's mate was? Lila asked softly. Died 3 years ago. The house hasn't been the same since. Lila's chest tightened. So that was the shadow she'd sensed behind his eyes. He doesn't speak of her. Not to anyone, Alara said. But some nights he still stands by that portrait, as if waiting for her to speak back. Lila looked at the painting again. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, gentle, warning, almost pitying. Later that night, sleep wouldn't come. She found herself drawn to the balcony, rain misting her hair. The valley below glittering with wet lights, and there he was standing by the edge of the terrace below. Shirt damp, gaze fixed on the storm beyond the mountains. She didn't mean to watch him, but there was something magnetic about the way he stood silent, powerful, and yet profoundly alone. Then his head turned sharply. Their eyes met. Even from that distance, she felt it, the pull, the silent shockwave of awareness. He didn't look away. And for a heartbeat, neither did she. When lightning split the sky, she saw the faintest shimmer of silver in his eyes. Not just human, not just alpha, something older, wilder, something. That made her wolf stir for the first time since the rejection. The storm began to fade, but inside her, something new was rising. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. And beneath that, A hunger she couldn't name. She didn't know it yet. But the man who had saved her life was about to rewrite it. And the next dawn would bring secrets that would shatter everything. She thought she knew about the night she was rejected. Morning in Shadowcrest didn't look like morning anywhere else. It wasn't bright. It was carved. The sun rose behind a veil of mist that turned every edge of Darius Blackwood's estate into something half real, half remembered. Glass quarters caught the light in thin ribbons. Water from the storm dripped from the balcony railings, shining like 1,000 small truths that refused to hide. Lila stood by the window of her new room, her breath fogging the glass. She had slept barely, and every time her eyes closed, the world between dreams and memory blurred. She kept seeing Adrian's eyes, the gold of betrayal, and then Darius's silver and unreadable, a reflection of something deeper than logic. The two men couldn't be more different. One had wounded her without hesitation. The other had saved her without reason. And yet both carried the same dangerous gravity, the kind that could change destinies with a single word. A soft knock pulled her back to the present. "Come in," she said. Quietly, the door opened to reveal Alara, holding a tray. Steam curled from a porcelain cup. "Breakfast, my lady." Lila blinked. "My what?" Alara smiled faintly. "That's how everyone is addressed here, those under Alpha's protection. You may not be one of us yet, but the house has its ways." "I'm not sure I belong here," Lila said, staring at the untouched food. "No one is sure at first," Alara replied. "But the Alpha wouldn't have brought you if you didn't matter." Lila frowned. "He doesn't even know me." "Maybe not," Alara said, setting the tray down. "But he smelled something in you. He trusts his instincts more than most." The day unfolded slowly. Shadowcrest was nothing like the crude dens of Silvercrest. Every hall spoke of legacy and silence. Every corner held a story that refused to be forgotten. Lila wandered through the library walls lined with books bound in leather so old they smelled of dust and rain. She trailed her fingers over the titles: Wolf Law Through the Ages, The Rise of Bloodlines, The Curse of the Luna's Mark. She stopped when one volume slid out too easily, almost as if someone had used it recently. The Spine Raid, The Bound Soul, a study of rejected mates. Her heart skipped. She opened it. Inside were notes, handwritten, the ink slightly faded but precise. Words like bond fracture, scent distortion, and psychic bleed filled the margins. One passage was underlined: when a mate bond is rejected by force, the surviving soul may carry fragments of power that were never meant to be hers. In rare cases, this can awaken dormant bloodlines long thought extinct. Lila's breath caught. Fragments of power. Could that be why Darius had stopped for her? Before she could read more, a voice spoke from behind her. "Curiosity suits you." She turned. Darius stood at the doorway, leaning on his cane, one hand tucked into his pocket. He wasn't smiling, but there was something like amusement in the lines near his eyes. "Do you always sneak up on people?" she asked, snapping the book closed. "I don't sneak," he said. "I move quietly." "There's a difference." His gaze dropped to the title of the book she held. The Bound Soul. His jaw tightened, barely perceptible, but enough. "You've chosen a painful subject," he said. "I didn't choose it." "It fell into my hands," she replied, steady. He walked closer, every step deliberate. "And what do you think you'll find in there?" "Answers. To what question?" Her voice came out before she could stop it. "Why I'm still alive." The silence that followed was so deep it felt sacred. Darius studied her, really studied her, until she had to look away. "You think survival needs a reason?" he said quietly. "It doesn't. It's a rebellion." "You survived because your soul refused to obey his rejection?" Lila swallowed hard. "You speak as if you've seen it before." His eyes flickered. I have. She waited for him to continue, but he didn't. The conversation ended the way a door closes slowly, soundlessly but with finality. Later that afternoon, Corin, the same man who had greeted her at the gates, found her in the courtyard. The Alpha requests your presence, he said. Requests, she repeated. Not commands. His lips twitched. He doesn't command those he respects. The words sank deeper than he intended. She followed him through the mansion's lower wing, where the air grew cooler, the light dimmer. They stopped before a large set of doors carved with a symbol, a wolf's head encircled by fire. His study, Corin said, knocking once before opening. The room smelled faintly of smoke and ink. Maps covered one wall, each marked with crimson lines. Silvercrest, she noticed, was circled in red. Darius sat behind a massive desk, papers neatly stacked. His expression unreadable. Sit, he said. She obeyed, the chair sinking under her weight. I need to ask you something, he began. When you crossed the border that night, did you feel anything unusual? Unusual? She echoed. He leaned forward. A surge, pain, heat, anything beyond the bond's break? She hesitated. I felt something like light under my skin. It burned, but not like fire. More like power trying to escape. His eyes sharpened. Power? She nodded slowly. Then it was gone. I thought it was just the rejection. Darius rose from his chair. The motion was fluid, almost predatory. It wasn't. He walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. You crossed into Shadowcrest the moment your bond broke. That's not coincidence. That's instinct. You were drawn here for a reason. Lila's pulse quickened. What reason? That, he said softly, is what I intend to find out. Night fell again. Shadowcrest's halls glowed with quiet light. Darius stood alone in the war room, staring at the map of the valley. His reflection shimmered in the window. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest echo of something he thought he buried connection. She was different. Not just broken. Not just lost. Something ancient stirred in her presence, something his wolf recognized. He closed his eyes. And for a fleeting second, he saw Evelyn, his lost mate, smiling from the balcony, whispering, "You will find her again." But not in the way you expect. A growl rumbled in his chest, soft and aching. He opened his eyes. Outside, in the garden below, Lila stood beneath the silver light of the moon, barefoot on the wet grass, her head tilted back. The bandage on her shoulder glowed faintly, as if light breathed beneath her skin. He clenched his fists. That glow, he had seen it once before. Long ago, atop the mark of the Luna's rebirth. His voice was barely a whisper. Moon, help us. What are you? Inside her chest, Lila's wolf stirred again. Not in pain. An awakening. She didn't know that far above her. Darius Blackwood, the billionaire Alpha who had rescued her, was no longer wondering if she was special. He was wondering whether she was. The key to saving or destroying everything he'd built. The moon over Shadowcrest was a pale wound in the night sky. Clouds drifted like ghosts, and the cold wind carried the scent of something ancient, a scent that made even the wolves in the valley grow restless. Lila stood in the courtyard at dawn, barefoot again, feeling the chill seep into her bones. She liked the cold. It reminded her she was still alive. Her shoulder had mostly healed, though sometimes the bandage pulsed with warmth. As if something beneath her skin was still mending itself or changing. She didn't know what she was becoming. She only knew that when she closed her eyes, she could feel things she shouldn't. The heartbeat of the earth beneath her. The slow breath of the forest. The pulse of wolves far beyond the gates of Shadowcrest. And lately, she could feel him. Darius Blackwood. He was always near. Even when he wasn't in sight, his presence pressed against her awareness, like the weight of a storm waiting for permission to break. That morning, she found him in the stables. The scent of hay, leather, and wolf filled the air. Darius was brushing down a black stallion, massive, scarred, beautiful. The horse snorted softly, leaning into his touch. Lila hesitated at the doorway. "You do this yourself?" He didn't turn. He doesn't let anyone else touch him. She smiled faintly. "You sound proud." "I respect loyalty," Darius said, finally glancing over his shoulder. "Even in beasts." There was something softer in his eyes today, something almost human. He gestured for her to step closer. "Here, he won't bite." Lila approached slowly, holding out her hand. The stallion sniffed her fingers and then lowered its head, brushing against her palm. "He likes you," Darius murmured. "That's unusual. Why?" "Because he's like me," he said quietly. "He doesn't trust easily." The words lingered between them, heavy and unspoken. She looked at him, really looked. There was a loneliness in his gaze that didn't belong to a man used to power. It was the loneliness of someone who had built walls too high to ever climb down from Dot and for a heartbeat. She wondered what would happen if she reached across that distance. Before she could, the sound of footsteps broke the moment. Corin appeared, breathless, his usually calm face tight with unease. "Alpha," he said, bowing quickly. "We have a problem." Darius straightened immediately. "Speak." Silvercrest patrols were seen beyond the northern ridge. "They're not just scouting this time. They're armed." Lila's blood ran cold. "They're here for me." Corin nodded grimly. "Their Alpha's son is leading them?" "Adrian," she whispered. The name tasted like iron on her tongue. Darius's expression turned to stone. "He's crossed the border?" "Yes, Alpha, with 10 men. They're demanding entry." Darius's eyes flashed silver. "Shadowcrest doesn't answer to demands." He turned to Lila. "You will stay inside. Do not step out until I return." "I can explain." He cut her off. "You owe him nothing, Lila." She swallowed hard. "And if he forces his way in?" Darius's lips curved into something dark. "Then he'll learn why no one crosses into my land uninvited." By the time Darius reached the gates, the air had already thickened with tension. The Silvercrest patrol stood at the boundary, 10 men in armor marked with gold, their eyes burning with pack pride. At their center stood Adrian Hollow, the man who had once called her mate, the man who had broken her. Without hesitation, Darius stopped on the other side of the iron gate, his aura expanding outward like a shadow come to life. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command, smooth, calm, lethal. "You've crossed into my territory, Halle. That's either very brave or very stupid." Adrian smirked, though his knuckles were white around the hilt of his sword. "I came for what's mine." Darius's eyes narrowed. "You've mistaken Shadowcrest for a market. Nothing here is for sale, least of all her." "She's my mate," Adrian snapped. "The bond doesn't just disappear because she ran to you." "You rejected her," Darius said, voice low, each word carved with precision. "In front of your pack. You made it disappear yourself." Adrian's jaw tightened. "It was a mistake." Darius's gaze sharpened. "And now that you've realized your error, you think you can simply claim her again?" "I will claim her," Adrian hissed. "Or there will be war." Darius stepped closer to the gate, his presence like thunder pressing down on the earth. "Then pray your father has the stomach for it." Inside, Lila paced the marble hallway, heart racing. She could feel their voices through the bond of the valley, alpha energy clashing like storm fronts. The ground itself seemed to hum beneath her feet. She couldn't stay still. She couldn't hide while others fought her battles, ignoring the guards' protests. She pushed through the front doors and stepped into the cold wind. The courtyard stretched before her, mist curling like living things. Darius and Adrian stood face to face. Two alphas from two different worlds, one forged in privilege, the other in scars. Stop this, Lila said. Her voice cutting through the air. Adrian's head snapped toward her, his expression flickering between relief and desperation. Lila, her name from his lips made something inside her flinch. Go back, Darius said without turning. This isn't your fight? Yes, it is, she said firmly, because I'm the reason it started. Adrian took a step toward her, but Darius's hand lifted, a single motion that froze him in place. The power in that gesture made even the Silvercrest wolves instinctively bow their heads. Tell me why you're here, Lila said, her voice trembling despite her effort. Adrian's gold eyes softened. Because I was wrong. I rejected you out of pride, and it destroyed me. Every night since that bond broke, I've felt the emptiness tearing at me. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I came to take you home. Home? She repeated bitterly. You mean back to the place where you humiliated me? Lila, no, she snapped, stepping forward. You had your chance to choose me, Adrian. You threw me away like I was nothing. He flinched. I didn't know what I was losing until it was gone. Then that's your curse to bear, she said coldly. Because I'm not coming back. Adrian's expression hardened. You think he cares for you? You think the Alpha of Shadowcrest does anything without a reason? Lila's stomach twisted. You don't know him. Oh, I know his kind, Adrian sneered. He saved you because he wants to use you? Shadowcrest has been hunting for something, a weapon, a prophecy. You're a tool to him. Enough, Darius said, his voice a quiet growl that silenced everything around them. You're trespassing, Hale, and you're testing my patience. Adrian's eyes blazed. If you keep her, you're declaring war on Silvercrest. Darius smiled, slow, deadly. Then war it is. The air cracked. The two alphas' energy collided, invisible but crushing. The wolves behind Adrian staggered back, their knees buckling under the pressure. Lila gasped, feeling the power surge like lightning between them. Stop it, she cried, but they didn't. Adrian lunged first. His claws glinted as his body shifted partially, wolf strength surging through him. Darius met him midair, his cane clattering to the ground as his own transformation flickered beneath his skin silver, veins glowing like molten steel. The clash was thunder and fury. The ground trembled. Trees bent. The moon itself seemed to shiver. Adrian's fist connected with Darius's jaw. Darius countered, driving his knee into Adrian's ribs. They moved too fast, too fierce, two storms tearing through flesh and air alike. Lila could barely breathe. The wolves of Shadowcrest emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing, ready to defend their alpha. Alpha! Corin called out. We must stop, but no one could stop it until Lila stepped forward. She didn't know what possessed her, only that the moment she shouted stop, something deep inside her broke open. A wave of energy burst outward, bright, blinding, silver white. It hit both alphas like a tidal force, hurling them apart. The wind howled through the courtyard, ripping leaves from trees, shaking the ground to its core. When the light faded, both men were on their knees. Adrian's eyes were wide with shock. Darius's were narrowed, but not in anger, in realization. Lila stood at the center of it all, her eyes glowing faintly, her skin illuminated by threads of moonlight. The bandage on her shoulder had burned away, revealing a mark, intricate, circular, radiant, a Luna's mark, but not one bound to any alpha. It was something older. Stronger. Adrian whispered, by the gods. What are you? Darius rose slowly, his gaze fixed on her, awe mixing with something far more dangerous. She's not yours, he said softly, eyes still locked on Lila. She never was. She's the moon's chosen. The courtyard fell into stunned silence, and in that silence, Lila realized the truth that would change everything. Her rejection hadn't ended her destiny. It had rewritten it. Far beyond the valley, the elders of both packs would soon whisper of a new prophecy. A Luna without an Alpha, a bombless queen marked by the moon itself, and two powerful men, one who had rejected her, and one who would risk everything to keep her, would soon learn that she wasn't the prize in this war. She was the power that would decide it. The night that followed was not a night of peace. It was a night that bled. The winds over Shadowcrest carried the metallic tang of tension, the kind that coats the back of your throat and whispers of something coming. The stars themselves seemed to retreat, hiding behind black clouds. Every wolf in the valley felt it. Even the ones who didn't know why, even the ones pretending they weren't afraid. Lila couldn't sleep. Not after what she had done. Not after what she had become. When she closed her eyes, she could still see the blast of silver light, the way it had hurled both alphas away like leaves in a hurricane. She could still hear the echo of Adrian's gasp, the disbelief in Darius's voice when he called her the moon's chosen. She had never wanted power. She had only wanted to be enough. But now power wanted her. At dawn, Shadowcrest prepared for war. The courtyard was a storm of movement, warriors strapping on armor, sharpening blades, loading rifles that gleamed black under the morning light. Wolves in human skin spoke quietly to each other, some praying, some laughing like they didn't know how else to stop shaking. Darius stood at the center of it all. Every inch the alpha dark coat scarred hands, eyes that had forgotten how to fear. Corin spoke beside him, listing defenses, positions, plans. But Darius's gaze kept drifting toward the mansion where Lila stood on the balcony, watching everything unfold. Their eyes met briefly. For a moment, the world fell still. Then she turned away.